Welcome to the dimly lit moors, shrouded waves, dusk-cloaked marshes, shadowed peaks, and dark forests of the world of Innistrad. Forget about the synth-scored moth house and greasy robot world. This is the classic gothic horror plane, and one of Magic's most popular settings. Which is why Innistrad Remastered is the latest of the remastered set series WotC has done. A set comprised of all the tastiest, most sellable bits from the three Innistrad blocks of the past. Why, it's Avacyn, and Edgar Markov, and my favourite Emrakul. They're all here. And as Magic sets of the now are wont to do, Innistrad Remastered's got loads of different card styles and the like, with lots of opportunities for classic Innistrad-y cards to get brand new art. Something I'm particularly interested in. So to celebrate the release... I don't know if celebrate is the right word. I don't feel that strongly about it. To acknowledge the release of Innistrad Remastered, and to briefly allow me to focus on some Magic lore I enjoy whilst I'm sandwiched between War of the Spark and current Magic, I thought it would be fun to use the legendary characters from the remastered set to tell the story that accompanied Innistrad's previous sets. Across the Plains timeline, I've squeezed in all the legendary characters in the remastered set, and for the ones with new art, we'll delve into the flavour of their mechanics, and of each piece of artwork. Yes, it will be a sumptuous buffet of lore remembering and flavour reviewering, fit for a vampire's wedding spread. So then, let's start at the start, and begin with the card that WotC most want us to know is in the set. Edgar Markov. Edgar is the beginning of Innistrad's story. Thousands of years ago in its distant history, the then human alchemist, Edgar Markov, experimented with blood in order to combat the famine that was afflicting the land and his people. He was goaded into experimenting with angel blood by the demon Shilgengar, who, unbeknownst to Edgar, had actually caused the famine. So Edgar and his sons kidnapped an angel, and from her blood, Innistrad's vampirism was born, with Edgar becoming the first of the Plains vampires, gifting his newfound immortality to his family and 3 other noble families. The card itself costs 3, a red, a white, and a black for a legendary vampire knight with eminence. Whenever you cast another vampire spell, if Edgar Markov is in the command zone or on the battlefield, create a 1/1 black vampire creature token. He's got first strike and haste, and whenever Edgar Markov attacks, put a +1 counter on each vampire you control. An immensely powerful commander. The most popular vampire commander is probably the most popular Mardu commander. He's a very popular commander for efficiently making you an obscene amount of vampires very quickly, and then even buffing them for you. In terms of flavour, I mean, pooing out lots of vampires incredibly quickly and benefiting them all feels appropriate. It feels weird that Edgar's a knight rather than a noble, but then noble didn't exist as a creature type before Throne of Eldraine when this was printed in Commander 2017. I guess the reason it hasn't been errated is because Knight is an existing creature type. Vulcan Barga's art I have always been romantically in love with. It's stunning. For one of Magic's prolific and maybe best artists, well, definitely one of their best artists, this might be my favourite amongst all their work. It's just sublime. And for a character that had quite a lot of prestige attached to them, years before this card was ever printed, the art just knocks it out the park, and it was such an excellent moment when this was printed in 2017 for the first time, and we finally got to see Edgar Markov, and the art lived up to the pomposity. It's just such a perfect mood for the character, surrounded by attendants, casually being outfitted, holding his arms up in an I own everything pose, which just happens to also perfectly work for the outfitting he's receiving. It's glorious, gorgeous paintwork and colours. It's just a stunning, excellent piece, which might be my only issue with the other pieces, to be honest. The new printing by Betty Jiang in Crimson Vow frame does an excellent job capturing that same sense of regal grandiosity. Maybe not to the same degree as the original, but it definitely gets close. And I like that we have 4 hands all reaching up and toasting Edgar, at least to my mind, representing the 4 vampire houses that fall underneath him, or semi-fall underneath him. And as much as I do think the image is beautifully constructed, it doesn't carry maybe enough of a different tone to the original for my mind. Although I do prefer it to the Martina Fokova version. As much as I do like Martina Fokova, I'm not a huge fan of the young Edgar depicted there, as that doesn't really make any sense considering he was turned into a vampire when he was old. I feel like Edgar maybe should look a little less old than when he turned, but he's still the grandfather of Innistrad in a way, you know. I feel like he should look the part in the way that he sort of ideally does in the Volkenbarger version. It's just, the problem is it's just such a difficult image to beat. Not that they necessarily have to, but let's look at the Jack Hughes version in the movie poster frame. I do think this run of movie poster cards did a better job being legible, even if the text is a bit small, whilst still stylistically evoking the style that they're trying to. This has a beautiful composition that perfectly reads as a classic poster, and I like what appears to be the angel Marix that Edgar abducted. This claw potentially being his, but more likely maybe Shilgangar's. I'm not entirely sure why Edgar is dressed like he is, like maybe like a ye olde magician. I'm not sure if the lighting of the image is making me just think of him as a magician, and he's just wearing like more of an old-timey showman outfit. But yeah, it does sort of feel magician-y, and I'm not quite sure why. It's not necessarily a bad image, I just, I'm a little confused by it. I suppose it's just warping the character to fit the style of the image, which isn't necessarily the case with some of the other movie posters, but it doesn't necessarily work badly. I guess I'm just not that fussed about magic characters cosplaying anymore, you know? We've got so much of that nowadays. So amongst the first people that Edgar infected with vampirism were his family, including poor old famous Sorin, a reluctant drinkee of the angel blood, it seems. So when Sorin was at least partially forced by his grandfather and family to drink the serum brewed of angel blood, the trauma of the experience caused his latent planeswalker spark to ignite, and he was flung across the multiverse. But even being a bon vivant with endless worlds laid out before him, Sorin still always retained some love for his homeworld, acting as kind of a detached dark protector. So the Sorin that's in this set is one of the better ones. It's Sorin Imperious Bloodlord, who's only 2 and a black for a 4 loyalty planeswalker. For +1, you can give target creature you control Death Touch and lifelink until end of turn. If it's a vampire, put a +1 counter on it. For a different +1, you can sacrifice a vampire. When you do, Sorin deals 3 damage to any target and you gain 3 life. And for -3, you can put a vampire card from your hand onto the battlefield. This is powerful in various formats by allowing you to put strong vampires in cheaply, shave a lot of mana off of your expensive vampires, and cast them on turn 3 or sooner. Sorin's first 2 abilities might feel slightly underpowered, but then again he's a 3-mana planeswalker and that third ability is just insane. All of them feel vampire-esque. Each of those abilities even refers specifically to vampires, so can you get any more vampire tribal than this Sorin? Which I suppose makes sense, because ultimately Sorin cares about the vampires of Innistrad the most, but his methods of preserving the vampires don't often preserve individual vampires very well, although I'm not really sure how you'd represent that anyway. Chaystone's original has always been fantastic. We're clearly situated in this church-esque tomb-like room with the light from outside illuminating Sorin's face and the statue behind him. That shadow that he casts just gives us such a perfect sense of depth. I can feel the depth in the image. I can tell exactly how far my hand will reach between Sorin and that statue. Chaystone might be the best artist for planeswalkers, particularly. Just so many stunning pieces over the years. And this is definitely among my preferred images of Sorin. But then again, Sorin looks cool, right? It's hard to do a bad Sorin, really. Maybe that one from Shadows of Innistrad, but even that one's not that bad. Martina Fakova is here to fight Chaystone for that title, though, with her beautifully scowling Sorin, Imperious Bloodlord. Martina Fakova also painted us the last Sorin, Sorin the Mirthless. I'm definitely more attracted to that Sorin rather than the scowling one, but they are both very Geralt-esque, and I appreciate this kind of rugged approach to Sorin. His long hair and pale vampire smooth skin give him a kind of androgyny anyway, so outside of that, I think depicting him as more masculine or feminine can be done at the individual artist's leisure to a degree, but both can look great, and Martina's great at walking that line and injecting a bit more rugged masculinity here. It works. Sorin's death magic is regularly depicted as sort of thick black smoke, and it looks fantastic coming off his sword here. The statues crying to either side of him, potentially a reaction to Sorin's blood magic. I like Sorin here emerging from between these 2 statues as well, and the sort of grand architecture. It feels like everything in front of us is an institution of Innistrad. So being a planeswalker and a vampire gave Sorin at least a bit of perspective compared to his plane-bound brethren, and it became apparent to Sorin how, whilst the vampirism had saved them from dying of famine, both by allowing them to subsist off of blood and by reducing the population that needed to eat, it was that reduction of the population that would ultimately lead to the vampire's destruction. No one truly knows what will happen when the vampires run out of prey, but Sorin definitely didn't want to find out. So Sorin decided that even against the wishes of his family and other fellow vampires, he was going to have to do something to preserve the human population. He looked to Innistrad's angels for inspiration, beings natural to the plane, born from its white manner, evoking its ideals of community and protection, justice and order. At the time, Innistrad had 4 archangels, all white but otherwise aligned with one of the other 4 colors. And all of them have a card in Innistrad Remastered, which is nice. But even with the angels there protecting them, with the new threat of the vampires, the humans were still being gradually diminished. So, in a strange, ironic reversal of fate, Sorin used his own blood in a ritual to construct an angel of his own. Avacyn, the Angel of Hope, was born of a ritual that Sorin can apparently never repeat. Immensely powerful, vastly outweighing that of her fellow archangels. Avacyn protected the humans with her spear and bolstered them with her magic. The church grew up around her and became the primary institution of humanity, a religious order governing and protecting the various human cities. Avacyn was nearly indestructible and was uncannily capable of protecting, able to hear those who prayed to her in need. The card itself, Avacyn Angel of Hope, costs 5, and white and white and white. It's a legendary angel. It's got flying, vigilance, and indestructible, and other permanents you control have indestructible. A golden helix streaked skyward from the Helvault. A thunderous explosion shattered the silver monolith, and Avacyn emerged, free from her prison at last. Spoilers for later on in this story, we'll get to that. We'll get to what the flavor text is talking about, that you likely already know. Jason Chan's art depicts Avacyn soaring against the sun, overcoming the clouds behind her wings, crowning her in a religious holy glow as is appropriate for an angel that is the center of a religion. Being a design of Sorin, I like that Avacyn's kind of goth, with her black lipstick and her black flared sleeves. I kind of like that her outfit evokes her maker and hints at him a little bit, it's fun. And as you can see, her spear bears her symbol just beneath the blades. An excellent piece for the Angel of Hope. The other piece of Avacyn is by Josh Newton, perhaps my favourite movie poster frame artist. And here he has, again, executed a brilliant piece. I'm confused by what I am supposed to feel about it. You know, the composition is gorgeous. I honestly love it. I love how the demon's eyes in the background are just like slightly out of focus as well, compared to the sharpness of the hands and the angel in the foreground. I love the composition. It's gorgeous. And it evokes this emotion of this trapped angel so perfectly. Like this angel, regardless of her strength and power, is nothing compared to these binds around her that she can't necessarily even perceive. And that's just perfectly captured by this image, obviously. But is that the feeling that we want for Avacyn at the height of her power? When she's giving everything indestructible and she herself is so... It's just odd, and I'm a bit confused about who these demons' hands are. Is this Griselbrand? I don't think that's Griselbrand, is it? It doesn't look like him. Maybe it is. And if it is, why aren't his hands weapons? You know? Could be Shilgan? I guess, but then that wouldn't really make any sense because they're like sort of on opposite ends of a timeline. I'm just sort of confused. Who is this? I can headcanon this image to make myself like it. I'll do the work. Let's do it. I like to imagine this is Avacyn's perception of Sorin at the moment of her realization of her role at the end of Shadows of Innistrad, where she ultimately chooses that she would sooner die fighting than return to her role. And she was also visually seeing lots of things as warped, disgusting monsters as well. And at that moment in the story, she was seeing Sorin as a reflection of her feelings about him, that he was monstrous. So I think this card, funnily enough, could kind of represent that moment of realization for Avacyn quite well, really. So I do like it as that, and I just love this image so much by Josh Newton that I am willing to do that legwork to make the image work. But yes, in that context, I think this image works quite well for me. I'm not sure about any other context, but that one is fun and fine, and this looks great. So with Avacyn in place, Innistrad was pretty chill for a time. The humans had at least a few angels, including a mega one, to keep them all safe. Not so safe that the vampires couldn't eat none of them, and some vampires definitely died, obviously, in the process, but that was the point. And now both populations could continue to sustain. But alas, Avacyn disappeared at some point before the original Innistrad set. And so the first 2 sets of the original Innistrad block depicted us an Innistrad sans sans Avacyn, starting to fall to the forces of darkness in her absence. What had become of her? She'd only gone and bloody got stuck in the Helvault, a big slab of silver that Sorin carved out of the moon and stuck on the earth so he could stick all of his problems in it without thinking about them. Basically a TARDIS prison, a lightless void on the inside with a seemingly infinite amount of space for storing stuff. Whenever a demon or monster of the plane couldn't be eradicated by Avacyn, she would grab it and stick it in the Helvault. Job done. And Innistrad was crawling with demons at all times, but definitely back in the day, back in the pre-Avacyn days. So a lot of demons got shoved in that vault. Perhaps the most powerful of the demons that Avacyn attempted to imprison in the Helvault was Griselbrand. Another famous card, banned in Commander and apparently Oathbreaker. He's 4 and 4 black for a legendary demon with flying and lifelink, and pay 7 life, draw 7 cards, which is pretty nice when he's a 7/7 with flying and lifelink. Avacyn emerged from the broken Helvault, but her freedom came at a price. Him. Talia, Night Cathar. Paying 7 life for 7 cards is a very good deal. Demons are supposed to make dark deals with you, aren't they? So paying life for cards always feels appropriate. Maybe the deal feels a bit too good on our end, though, considering that he's going to give you that life back relatively easily. Igor Kielik's original has always been gorgeous, as is pretty much all of his work. I like the smoky background combined with the kind of movie moonlight lighting, which looks great across Griselbrand's side here, highlighting his horns. I've always liked Griselbrand's design as kind of unwieldy, and like he almost has to rely on others in a way. Like his power is so immense in his ability to obliterate you or whatever that he can kind of force others into doing things for him, which he probably needs, lacking hands. I think he works quite well as the design for a demon at the head of a cult, as Griselbrand was worshipped by the Skursdag, a secret dark human cult that sought to upend the Avacynian church, following the misleadings of the demon. There's an old new frame for it if you want that, which actually I think it looks pretty good for Griselbrand here. And a movie poster version by James Buscema. I don't know how to pronounce that name. This one is providing a nice silhouette for his keywords on his wings, which is cute, and doing a good impression of Chernobog against the skyline. The composition reminding me a bit of Emrakul, The Promised Ends, with this cityscape breaking up the middle of the image and a bunch of Cathars in the foreground, pointing at what I'm assuming is their prey. Lovely high contrast, works perfectly for depicting these almost silhouetted characters so boldly. So while Avacyn was attempting to shove Griselbrand in the Helvault, he grabbed hold of her and yanked her in with him, where she stayed for both Innistrad and Dark Ascension. Now, many years ago, the planeswalker Liliana Vess, who made a home on Innistrad and likes the place, signed a contract with 4 demons in order to retain the immortality that she lost. And rather than fulfill the contract and give ownership of her soul over to the demons, Lily just decided that she would kill all the demons and gain her freedom that way. Having checked Kothoped off her list, the next was Griselbrand, and so Lily came to Innistrad. The druidic planeswalker Garruk tailed Liliana to Innistrad after she cursed him prior. But after a brief confrontation, the necromancer bested the poor wild speaker once more and went back to what she was doing. Through some tomfoolery that we don't really get the specifics of because the book that was attached to the set was allegedly cancelled.
You, Cathar, save this shiny rock or save the lives of your fellow warriors. How predictable.
Liliana convinced the church soldier Cathar Talia to help her blow up the Helvault, having learned that Griselbrand was in it. And so Lily did just that, unbeknownstly, is that a word, freeing Avacyn and briefly freeing Griselbrand before she murdered him dead, checking demon number 2 off her list. So I believe the other printing of this card, the movie poster version, is set just then. And so with Avacyn returned, the original Innistrad block ends on a high note. Things had never looked so good for the humans of the plane. And Sorin was happy because his plan was working again. When we returned to Innistrad in 2016, things weren't looking quite so hot as when we left it. Madness had gripped the plane as some dark conspiracy was unfolding just beyond everyone's perception. Neither the vampires, nor the werewolves, nor humans were immune to this madness, with many turning on each other or turning to strange and dark cults. like those of the Westvale Abbey, who, in the absence of their now dead demon lord Griselbrand, awoke a new lord in Ormondal instead. Definitely amongst my favourite lands. I'm so happy the Westvale Abbey is back for this set. Let's hope when Ormondal gets another card, it isn't such a letdown as it was in Innistrad Midnight Hunt. In an effort to squeeze in all of the cards that got new art in this story rundown, I will describe what the inhabitants of the village near Lake Java did in order to appease the monster sleeping beneath the water nearby. The Gitrog monster, depicted here with the arm of one of the poor village's human sacrifices they provided it in order to not become one themselves. The Gitrog monster is 3 and black and green for a 6/6 frog horror with death touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Gitrog monster unless you sacrifice a land. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. The Gitrog monster is fun in that you have to provide it sacrifices. Of course it will benefit you for this, but you do need to feed it or it will go away, which is quite fun. Obviously you're feeding it lands rather than creatures, as was the case in the story, but I think on the field the Gitrog still kind of feels this way, as you are forced to feed it resources. Stephen and Raid's movie poster style gives us a lovely scaled up Gitrog monster, dwarfing this poor boatsman as it illuminates him with its giant yellow eyes. Beautiful piece with the painterly style absolutely evoking the era it's trying to. I guess my one criticism with the composition of the text is that Death Touch almost looks like the title, which is a little bit strange, but it still works overall. I like this for a creature that's typically depicted as a snarling, growling, arm-chewing monster. Oh, Nils Hammer's drawn this beast twice. That's interesting. I like this printing of the Gitrog monster for providing a slightly more subtle mode of horror than the typical interpretations of the Gitrog, with most of its body submerged, iceberged beneath the surface of the lake. In their increasing madness and fear, the small village that would regularly appease the Gitrog with sacrifices found themselves whittled down to but a few through those repeated sacrifices. Perhaps the worst news that anyone could get during this period of increased insanity was the fate and actions of Innistrad's angels. Beings born of pure mana with an innate sense of justice. Once that sense of justice began to skew, the angels began to bring down their wrath upon a human population they no longer deemed worthy of their protection, but instead as sinners deserving their righteous retribution. Avacyn herself's card for the block demonstrated this change completely. This Avacyn could only provide indestructible briefly upon entering, and we can see even in her art that her holy spear is starting to fracture. And of course, when a non-angel creature you control dies, she becomes Avacyn the Purifier. Wings that once bore hope are now stained with blood. She is our guardian no longer. Manipulated by the same unseen force that had led the rest of the plane to madness, Innistrad's angels wrought terror upon the human population. The church that had built up around her warped in order to follow the new dark direction of their leader, led primarily by the Lunarch Inquisition. Far more interested in following the angels' example by punishing human sinners than providing protection to the communities they'd established. Everything was pretty bad for everybody. Many of the church's holy soldiers, the Cathars, were either pushed into mockeries of their former selves or pushed away from the church, such as the two heroic Cathars that we follow in each block, Thalia and Odric. Both believers in the ideals of the church, Thalia formed the Order of St. Traft in this period to uphold those ideals, and Odric followed his friend in resignation. Odric, Lunarch, Marshal, costs 3 and a white for a legendary human soldier that's a 3/3. At the beginning of each combat, creatures you control gain first strike until end of turn if you have a creature that has first strike. The same is true for flying, death touch, double strike, haste, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, menace, reach, skulk, trample, and vigilance. Odric is the friend of any friend with lots of keywords. Pair him with Atraxa or that Eldrazi from a little while ago. Odric dishing out keywords to everybody works well for the idea of him as a commander. And I also like that he sort of needs another creature to be inspired by in order to do this though, which works well for him being the one who followed Thalia out of the church. It's a relatively straightforward piece by Cynthia Shepherd here, with Odric's holy enchanted illuminated blade illuminating his face and his holy conviction. It's a good image for depicting the character perhaps in his prime, with his faith still intact. But that ultimately isn't the point in Odric's story that this card represented initially. And, oh god, Chase Stone is just so bloody good at painting people. If I'm honest, I vastly prefer Chase Stone's original. Not that there's anything wrong with Cynthia Shepard's version, and it's a great depiction of the character, but there's just so much more going on here. There's so much more story in this image. I love the sense of doubt that we can get from Odric as he stares into the symbol of his church, here upside down, as it's on the hilt of his sword. For a moment in the story when this devout Cathar's faith was shaken, this card captures that mood far better than the other. Odric's good friend and fellow Cathar, Thalia, also found herself turning away from the church in this time, on moral grounds. Thalia, heretic Cathar, is 2 and a white for a legendary human soldier. She's a 3/2 with first strike, and creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter tapped. Salvation will not be granted by the Lunar Council. It must be earned, at the edge of a sword, if necessary. I'm not quite sure what Thalia providing hate to your opponent's board points towards her being a heretic, but then her original card was also kind of a hate card. Magali Villanueva's original is also a stunning piece that I feel evokes the mood excellently, with Talia's questioning expression being sold greater by the fact that she's looking over her shoulder. I feel like the dark shading that she's looking back towards versus the bright light illuminating her hair and the direction that she's following. It almost feels like she's rejecting the path behind her, and it works so perfectly for the mood of a heretic. Like with the Odric card, this one doesn't feel like it delivers the mood of the character in that moment quite as well as the original. Although, given that she's a heretic and that is the only point in Talia's career where that was the case, it has to be depicting that same point. When belief is shaken, seek faith in yourself. That temple must never fail. The teachings of Saint Traft. This version of Thalia triumphantly stands upon a rooftop where she's slaughtered a group of zombies, the morning light illuminating her silver hair. I like the frost detailing along the rooftop, which definitely gives the scene this early morning feel, and works even greater with Thalia's sense of triumph here, as she's chopped up these zombies before you've even finished breakfast. But again, it doesn't sell the mood of a heretic Cathar quite as effectively as Magali's original. Another character to crop up during this period of madness is Innistrad's werewolf planeswalker, Arlen Cord. Arlen's story was semi-self-contained, but as a previous Cathar infected with lycanthropy and then spark-ignited into a planeswalker, Arlen retained the values of her human church, but believed in preserving her new werewolf brethren. So Arlen Cord's card is 2 and a red and a green for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. You can +1, and until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gets +2/+2 and gains vigilance and haste. Or you can 0 and create a 2/2 green wolf creature token and transform Arlen. Once transformed, Arlen, embraced by the moon, has a +1 of creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until the end of turn. A -1, Arlen deals 3 damage to any target and transform her. And a -6 of you get an emblem with creatures you control have haste and tap. This creature deals damage equal to its power to any target. Now, according to Scryfall, you can't activate Arlen's backface abilities the turn you transform her. So you're not allowed to just make a wolf and then ping someone for 3 and then make another wolf and then ping someone for 3 and make another wolf. That's not allowed. That's not fair. Why can't I have 6 power and 9 damage for 4 mana? Fine then, game. Big fan of Winona Nelson's original art, the beautiful orange lighting swallowing her up, then transforming to green on the back. It's a great representation of the card's 2 colors even. And it's fun to have older lady planeswalker. She's not even that old. She's like late 30s, early 40s kind of look. But still, more of a rarity amongst Magic's planeswalkers. The new version by Cabrol in the Innistrad Midnight Hunt frame, which I am a big fan of, has a much more high contrast comic book aesthetic, as I think many of the cards in that frame did, similar to the frame itself. I like this piece. I definitely don't like it as much as the original, although it's providing a much more different mood. I'm not sure how well the blue goes with the frame, in my opinion. The backside of the card potentially works a little better. I'm a bit unsure as to why these... I'm a bit confused as to this blue glowing orb that Arlen has. Firstly, as to what magic that is, as she doesn't really ever do anything like this. And secondly, as to why it's like blue, as it makes her look like a blue mage, when I don't even get further from blue than Gruul. I think that's about the opposite. Let's look at Arlen's wiki page. Does she have any powers that this could represent? I mean, she's an archmage, right? So she's got to be like real good at magic still. Come on, there's got to be something on this wiki that can justify that orb. Hey, she's shorter than me. That's interesting. So yes, she was an archmage of Gold Knight. So perhaps this is some of her archmage style powers from when she was channeling the church's magic more so. But then the church's magic a lot of the time relied on the existence of Avacyn. So again, maybe this could be an art of her depicted during Avacyn's reign. But still, it's just a real odd choice for this character to depict her like holding a glowing blue mana orb. But Arlen aside, the madness of the plane's denizens and the violence of its angels came to a head at the end of Shadows over Innistrad, when Sorin was forced to end his angelic creation himself. Unfortunately, Avacyn's end was a far cry from an end to the plane's troubles. In the wake of her death, everything seemed to get much, much worse. In addition to being crazy, now everyone was warping into horrible fleshy shapes. In at least one unfortunate case, an entire town, people, buildings, foundations and all, melded together to become Hanweir, the writhing township. What a lovely depiction of a horrible thing. I've always felt this was referencing Christina's world with its composition. To the relatively few quote-unquote sane people remaining on the plane, it had become apocalyptically inhospitable. Gisa and Geralf, a rival brother-sister duo of necromancers, were forced to put their squabbling necro-warfare aside and team up during the events of Eldritch Moon. And I am delighted that their card got to return for the set. These fiends are slightly less tolerable than you. A sentiment that warms my heart, sister. I love Carla Ortiz's art for depicting this relationship, and it feels like they're speaking the flavor text directly in this exact moment, which I very much enjoy. What I don't like is that both of them are using weapons to defend against the Eldrazi horrors when that's not really how either of them fights. They're both necromancers. Yeah, it's a shame that this card didn't get new art for the set, because I would have always wanted to see this card reprinted with them both utilizing their skills. That's a much harder scene to depict, because you're going to need them plus something to fight plus two different sets of various zombies. But it'd be really fun to see them utilizing their scabs / called ghouls together. One of Geralf's greatest creations from the original Innistrad also got a new printing in this set. Grimgrin, Corpseborn, is a 3 and a blue and a black for a 5/5 zombie warrior. He enters tapped and doesn't untap during your untap step, but you can sacrifice another creature to untap Grimgrim and put a +1 counter on him. Whenever Grimgrin attacks, destroy target creature defending player controls, then put a +1 counter on Grimgrin. So Grimgrin is a scab, which means he's a Frankenstein-esque stitched-together zombie. The more mad science-y blue variant of zombies on Innistrad versus the traditional black ghouls, which are essentially just like purely reanimated. Classic magic style. Gissa's into the classic reanimation technique, whereas Geralf is a student of stitchery. And Grimgrin was one of his creations from the original block. This version of Grimgrin is a little more bloated than before. He definitely had that aesthetic going on in Peter Morbach's original, but here even more greatly so, particularly around his face, it seems. There isn't a ton of lore on Grimgrin, outside of us knowing that he was constructed as an homage to Gissa by Geralf, who constructed Grimgrin's face in honor of his sister. No issues with Chris Rannis's image. I think I prefer Peter Morbach's original, ultimately just for the mood. But for a card with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arts now, they're all kind of the same. And I appreciate that this is just a big, scary scab with a hook, and there isn't too much emotion you can evoke out of drawing this character beyond that which his design evokes, but they kind of just all have the same feeling, you know? He's just in the woods, dragging his hook around, being a scary zombie, and this image just delivers the exact same mood as the previous ones, really. So it's fine, but I'm questioning why this card was chosen to be reprinted for the set, and given that it was, why does it just deliver the same mood that every other printing of Grimgrin, of which we have surprisingly a few? Why are they all doing the same thing, really? So while some were managing to survive against the encroachment of madness and fleshiness, unfortunately, that was not the case for two of the plane's remaining archangels. Bruna and Gisela, the blue and red archangels respectively, each succumbed to the influence, turning on the humans they vowed to protect before both merging together into the monstrosity Brizella, Voice of Nightmares, which was perfectly depicted through the meld mechanic. I've never really understood why Gisela is so expensive. Is it just she's effective? She's like good? 3 good stats, 4 body. Is that worth that much money nowadays? I'm confused. I remember the professor saying it a million years ago in a video, but god damn it, wouldn't it be cool if they just gave Bruna and Gisela a partner and we could run them both in the command zone? You can run Bruna as an effective commander to assemble Brisella either way, but still. I like how Brisella's ability that prevents your opponents from casting spells with mana value 3 or less speaks to the opposite of Angel's typical values of wanting to protect the weak. With Brisella on the field, only the strong may survive. If I meld Bruna and Gazella, and Bruna is my commander, is Brazella my commander? Yeah, I'm definitely at least building this for cockatrice then. And of course, who else could enact this kind of Lovecraftian influence on the plane of Innistrad than the Eldritch god-esque being, the Eldrazi Emrakul, a being from outside of our physical reality, ancient and powerful and subsisting in the blind eternities, the unknowable, unlivable space between planes. Emrakul, the promised end, is 13 for a 13/13 Eldrazi that costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard. When you cast this spell, you gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn. After that turn, that player takes an extra turn. It's got flying, trample, and protection from instants, an enigma as vexing as life itself. An exceptionally powerful card, perhaps not quite as powerful as the original Emrakul, but this one isn't banned in Commander. Emrakul's power was chipped away at slightly for this card versus its 15/15 original, but given that 13 is a recurring theme on Innistrad, giving Emrakul 13/13 worked perfectly, in my opinion. The number of the apocalypse. Whilst being an immensely powerful, dominating god being from its combat stats and protection, Emrakul's warping influence is demonstrated by its ability to gain control of your opponent during their next turn. Emrakul's influence is so immense, she doesn't gain control of creatures, she gains control of players. I've always felt those mechanics were perfectly evoked in Jamie Jones's stunning artwork. This slice of Thraben on fire in the middle of the image, separating our lowly, grounded warriors as they clash in the streets above Emrakul's looming form, dominating the skyline, partially ethereally illuminated as she blocks out the sun, and the dark clouds wheel overhead, almost mimicking the angle of the underside of her jellyfish dome, kind of marrying the sky and her together. And as the townsfolk and corrupted townsfolk clash in the foreground, we can feel that gain control of ability being evoked, as your opponent's attention is forced away from the true threats to their safety, the 13/13 still looming in the background. It's just a perfect energy. I like how almost the speed of the image changes from foreground to background. Emrakul almost feeling like she's moving in slow motion versus the frantic action of all the gathered townsfolk. Lots of paintings of Emrakul are done so without any physical context. She's just sort of floating in canyons, etc. So having her crouched on the horizon, wreaking havoc on this town almost casually, it's just stunning. I don't know if there's a better image of this character. The movie poster art for Emrakul, The Promised End, is by the excellent Josh Newton, with this gorgeous image entirely made up of vibrant yellows, pinks, and blues. This excellent tilted Dutch angle perspective selling the classic giant monster movie poster effect with its posterized colors and composition. I love this giant yellow area of negative space, which is quite bold, I feel, and obviously gives background to the text, but it gives this claustrophobia to the escaping crowds as well, like the fact that few of them appear to be leaping over this little wall. I'm trying to say railing, but it's not a railing. Makes it seem like this yellow is blocking out a body of water or a giant drop. Emrakul perhaps looks a bit small here versus the original Promised End art, where she dominates the skyline, but I just love the kinetic energy in those tentacles, especially this carriage that's being ripped up in the background. For what is ultimately a very similar scene to the original art, I like that this one feels so different that it doesn't feel like it's trying to compete. So the reason that Emrakul had come to Innistrad, as no Eldrazi had ever been seen there before, was all down to a character that Sorin royally pissed off 1,000 years ago, or just over the course of 1,000 years, I suppose. Nahiri, the Lithomancer, is one of the biggest characters in Innistrad's story that doesn't get a card in Innistrad Remastered. But her and Sorin and the Dragon Planeswalker Ugin all collectively worked to imprison the world-eating Eldrazi on Nahiri's home plane of Zendikar thousands of years ago. Thousands of years later than that, what should have been a minor spat between the two former allies rapidly escalated into a magically violent duel. At the culmination of their duel, and back before it was destroyed, Sorin shoved Nahiri into the Helvault, which was all well and good to end the duel. The problem was, he left her there for 1,000 years. Nahiri wasn't very happy about that, and she was less happy after escaping the vault and returning back to her homeworld, only to see that the plan she'd made with the other two planeswalkers hadn't been upheld, and her world was being eaten by the now free Eldrazi. Revenge, Nahiri swore, and constructed a plan to get one back on Sorin by messing his world up just the same. Nahiri used her stone magic to disrupt the flow of mana on Innistrad, driving everyone crazy and luring the Eldritch god across the blind eternities toward the plane of Innistrad. Emrakul's emergence is depicted on the only card that features Nahiri in Innistrad Remastered, Through the Breach. Through the Breach costs 4 and a red for an arcane instant. You may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. That creature gains haste. Sacrifice that creature at the beginning of the next end step. You can splice this onto arcane for 2 and 2 red, which means that as you cast an arcane spell, you may reveal this card from your hand and pay its splice cost. If you do, add this card's effect to that spell. Originally a card from the original Kamigawa set, Champions of Kamigawa, 8 million years ago, back in my nostalgic memory. Originally depicting a kami piercing through the veil between the spirit and physical realms, the card also had an effective reprint as an Amonkhet invocation, showing how the Locust God tore down the Hekwama barrier on that plane. In Double Masters, the ambiguous name was effectively used again, and that was the first time this card in Randy Vargas's art depicted Nahiri summoning Emrakul to the plane. I've always been a huge fan of Randy Vargas's art, and you can see the remains of the Drownyard Temple being submerged as Emrakul rises from the deep. I'm not 100% sure that Nahiri was at the scene at the moment, but I've always loved this depiction, even if it was partially representative of her actions on the whole. But that purple does make the image pop in a very uncanny Eldritch way. This card also got a movie poster frame by Stephen Andrade. It's an interesting alternate take on this scene. I love the long shadow Nahiri's casting in the foreground. This sort of curving into the background perspective that Emrakul creates is very cool. I feel like I'm being sucked into the text and Emrakul's tentacles. It's an interesting, slightly different take on Emrakul as well, with this kind of mandible crown. And the lightning now changed to red, I think works well for keeping enough red in this full card image to remind us that this is a red spell. It's definitely a lot goofier than the alternate printing, but I very much like the mood it's delivering. So with Avacyn dead, Emrakul crouched on the human capital, and the world falling to flesh-warping madness, Sorin, the self-appointed protector of Innistrad, put aside his differences with Innistrad's other vampires, and rallied together a vampire army, all ready to go and ignore the Eldrazi threat, destroying Innistrad, and get needless revenge on the one who caused all this. That didn't go very well for Sorin at all, and Nahiri got to stick a cherry on her perfectly constructed revenge cake by sticking Sorin in a wall, powerless to stop his world's destruction. With another of Innistrad's grand institutions effectively neutered in the face of the Eldritch Divine. Luckily for everyone, the day was saved, in the same way that it usually is in Magic stories, by a group of people who have nothing to do with the plane but just showed up. The Gatewatch, Magic's Avengers team from the time, gathered to fight Emrakul and defend Innistrad at the behest of this block's protagonist, Jace, who came to the plane with questions for Sorin, but got sucked into investigating the strange goings-on. Although he mostly just arrived at various important scenes after everything important had already happened there, before saying, "What does it mean?" With the help of Tamio, a moonfolk researcher from the plane of Kamigawa, who liked moons and was hanging out on Innistrad because of its cool moon, but also got sucked into investigating the plane's unfolding mystery. The Gatewatch were able to subdue the Eldrazi for a time, but all would have been lost if not for the intervention of Liliana being the coolest and deciding, fine, if no one else is going to, I guess I'll save Innistrad. Using her unparalleled necromantic abilities to fight Emrakul with a huge horde of zombies, because Emrakul's mind and flesh warping control over the living doesn't extend to the dead. But even with Liliana's help, Emrakul would have likely devoured the world in tentacles, but she decided that the plane wasn't ripe enough, actually, and instead she would go and wait in the moon until it was, mind-controlling Tamio and rewriting one of her spells, locking herself away in the Silver Orb. With Innistrad under a tenuous but apparent safety, everyone began to pick up the pieces of their tentacle-racked lives, only now without the Archangel Avacyn to protect the humans. When we next returned to Innistrad for Midnight Hunt, Emrakul's presence in the moon seemed to be causing some unforeseen ill effects for the plane. Namely, the sun was going away, or rather the nights were getting longer and longer until night was all there was. Luckily, someone in Innistrad's past had already made a MacGuffin that fixed this exact thing, and the now Wickerman cult-esque humans of the block, who've come to follow forgotten folk magics as the Avacynian church crumbles, all decided to gather together and throw a big party, the magic of which would reignite the Celestus, as it's called, and stick the sun right back where it was supposed to be. But whoever switched it on last only bloody lost the bloody keys. Oh! So in the most exciting premise a magic story has ever had, the humans of Innistrad enlist planeswalking tourists to go on a treasure hunt for the missing key. So a small band of planeswalking heroes, back when there was loads of them, prance through the plane, getting into various scrapes on the trail of the key, following clues and tracking down leads. It's not a very good story. It's also barely represented at all in Innistrad Remastered. Whilst there's probably a couple of cards from Midnight Hunt within the set, the major villain of the set, Tovolar, wasn't reprinted here. Despite being the most popular werewolf commander, they didn't want to print any cards that had the day-night mechanic into Innistrad Remastered, it seems, because you need a few of them to make them really work, and nobody likes the mechanic. So Tovolar is probably the next biggest character after Nahiri to be missing from the remastered set. But that's okay, because I'll tell you what he was up to anyway. Tovolar led the largest werewolf pack that was only growing in size at the time of Midnight Hunt, as the werewolves were also doing so, growing physically bigger, I mean, as well as in numbers. What a great sentence. Tovolar didn't want the sun to come back, thank you, because werewolves are into moons and nighttime. Or more accurately, Tovolar was a proponent of savage werewolf freedom from oppressive human society, and with Eternal Night, he could ensure lycanthropic dominance over humanity. Arlen, Innistrad's nice planeswalking werewolf, disagrees with him. Arlen had a bit of a history with Tovolar's pack, and throughout the story, he regularly appealed to her to join his pack and abandon the humans. But after she bested him in savage, one-on-one bestial combat, his injuries and his sense of betrayal caused him to retreat with the other werewolves. And so the humans were free to activate the machine and save the day. Literally. But then, at the last second, Olivia showed up and nicked the key and off. Olivia is the head of the Voldaren vampire family, one of the first vampires gifted blood by Edgar. She appeared at the edges of the previous two Innistrad stories, but in Innistrad Crimson Vow, she took center stage. Olivia wants to rule all the vampires and the world and just everything, really. And as a vampire, if there is no day, she can do that quite effectively. She can do that even more effectively with a grip over the major vampire houses. And what better way to secure power than by marrying the other most powerful vampire? Sorin's granddad, Edgar. Olivia yoinked Edgar's coffin, roused him from his sleep, and charmed him with her blood. And lo did the realm prepare for a grand vampire wedding. Pausing from Olivia for a sec, during this period of Eternal Night, a few other, less central stories unfolded across the plane. Prior to the events of the festival, the Dryad planeswalker Ren came to Innistrad to leave her treefolk companion on his homeworld and find herself a new tree vessel friend, as her unquenchable fire meant she must always be embedded, but gradually burns her hosts until they have to eventually separate. A chance encounter with Teferi the Time Mage and the planeswalker's exchange of knowledge and skills saw Ren happily housed in her seventh and newest companion, time magic aged to perfection. Elsewhere, the black-aligned Archangel Lisa reformed, returning to life after having been killed by Avacyn 1,000 years ago. Avacyn's unwavering perspective deemed Lisa a heretic, but Lisa believed that enemies must be known. The parleys and pacts Lisa upheld with various vampires, witches, and demons were always done with intent to protect humanity. One of those pacts resurrected her, once the demon it was bound with was summoned by some desperate and hapless Innistradi. Lisa demonstrated her devotion to humanity by aiding the summoning's only human survivor in slaying the treacherous demon. By this point in Innistrad's story, Sigarda is the only other remaining Archangel, alongside her sister Lisa. And Sigarda is also really, really cool. She's been around since the beginning and was the only angel to survive Shadow's block uncorrupted, her deep love of humanity remaining unwavering throughout. She even sorrowfully put down her two melded sisters with the help of Thalia. Sigarda got a card in each block, but her original is the one reprinted for Innistrad Remastered, though the second one's got my favourite art, personally, with her backlit, dark Avenger pose and glorious judgmental eyes. Torrens has his own self-contained story and his own fleshed-out backstory, with too many points on it to get into here, but the Cathar deserter is a bit of a scoundrel with a heart of gold and a glowing mace. And he did free a village from the nightmare-drinking powers of Umbris by freeing Umbris from that village. But returning to the main plot, the wedding, again, let's look at the bride-to-be. Olivia Voldaren, the card, is 2 and a black and a red for a legendary vampire. She's a 3/3, she flies, and you can pay 1 and a red to deal 1 damage to another target creature. That creature becomes a vampire in addition to its other types, and you put a +1 counter on Olivia. For 3 and 2 black, you can gain control of target vampire for as long as you control Olivia. So for 7 mana, you can gain control of anything. Olivia's got excellent mechanics, just representing a vampire in general. Able to bite another one of your opponent's creatures, gaining strength herself, and then gaining control of them after the fact. This printing showed up in the original Innistrad block, and Olivia's gone through a varied amount of extravagant outfits in that time, though this is the original and, up until Crimson Vow, the most iconic. I do love how the ceiling and the stairway frames her in Eric Deschamps's piece as she glides across the ballroom, delivering the perfect tone of decadence that would come to exemplify her. The new printing of the card, in the movie poster style, depicts her in her iconic wedding dress from Crimson Vow. This one perhaps feels the least like a movie poster, but I still love the composition regardless. And it's lovely getting the original Olivia in her latest outfit. Excellent piece. Maybe my one criticism is the screaming mass of souls that makes up her dress's train, I think it's called, isn't quite so clearly a screaming mass of souls here as it is in some other images. You can still pick out hands and faces emerging from the glut, but yeah, especially to work at card size, I feel like I want that to be a bit more pronounced, personally. So in this most ostentatious of dresses, Olivia sought to marry Edgar and conquer the plane, and even captured and planned to execute the remaining Archangel Sagada to make the plan even more plane conquering. The tourist heroes from the previous set weren't into that, and they also wanted that key back, thanks. And Sorin, who likes it when the vampires aren't eating everything, and would also like his granddad back, also decides to stop the wedding. So the disgraced planar protector and the upstart planar visitors band together to crash a wedding and make their objections known. And so they do just that, stopping the ceremony, freeing the angel, and getting the bloody key back. After a tense battle, of course, where the villains are defeated but not harmed so much that they won't be seen again. Ideal. All that's left to be done is stick the key back in the thing and bring the bloody sun back. And so they do, and usher in a new dawn for Innistrad. Literally. Just like at the end of every Innistrad block, it's time to rebuild. But then, from another world, the machine legion of Phyrexia invaded countless worlds in the multiverse, including the plane of Innistrad. Through portals opened up by their great world-invading tree, the countless legions of the warped machine cult sought to remake the plane in their image. Desperate, unlikely alliances formed between the Innistradi to fight the inexorable tide. Sister and brother, Cathar and Frog. Lady barely anyone remembers, and guy that nobody remembers. Though even with a helpful plot beat recycled directly from Eldritch Moon, as anyone with a memory of Phyrexia knows, they are a nigh unsurpassable foe, ceaseless and devoted, the twisted product of terrible research and perverted worship spanning millennia, compelled by encoded fervor to gift their perfection to everyone in every world there is, drowning the multiverse in glistening oil that it may be completed by its baptism. All will be one. Luckily, they were all defeated and died. And they all died everywhere, and we don't need to think about them anymore. And that's the story of Innistrad. Welcome to the end of the video. As thanks for watching to the end, I will say thanks. Thanks. Well, that was nostalgic and fun. I think that's the quickest I've ever made a video, and it still took me way longer than I'm supposed to. There's a few videos cooking at the minute. The next part of my belabored Duskmourn analysis is next and almost complete. Guildless 4 is slow going. I went into it very excited, and I didn't account for how much of a motivation killer the two War of the Spark books are. I'm trying to separate my negative thoughts about War of the Spark books from the Guildless video itself, and they might have to become two videos as the series endlessly splits, although one of those wouldn't be a Guildless video. In the meantime, I want to do a video about Amonkhet in the wake of Aetherdrift, as I'm a fan of Amonkhet. But anyway, like the video, and it'll be like you've given me a real thumbs up in person, like I've briefly glimpsed you across the street, and you've given me a thumbs up. And I like it in this version of events, whereas I suppose in reality it might be kind of concerning if a stranger did that to me. But in this imagined context, it's good. It's really good, like the video. And then ring the bell, and it'll be like I've heard an ethereal, otherworldly bell that resonates with your name and terrifies me in the dead of night. Don't you want to terrify me in the dead of night? Then turn on notifications. And then go over to my Patreon and sign up for it, seeing as you are so diligently following my instructions. The names of the Brass Squire and Parcelmere go here. And sarcastic tone aside, I am so immensely thankful to everyone whose name adorns this screen. Your support is so gratefully appreciated. And all that remains to be done is list the names of those for whom I hold the utmost appreciation. Names whose written history has been warped by endless rolling, and so to honour them, I must speak them aloud. Sebastian Rees, Marshalmere, Eric Vaughan, Librarian of Leng, Stevo, Santiago Ardea, Chonga the Banished Mole King, Patrick Dane, Mimeo, Bob, and Dark Flame, whose name I cannot not read like that. They deserve my eternal thanks. And my final gift to you, plucked by the gods of Scryfall and presented to us through the random card button, is Flux. I don't think I have anything to say about Flux. No relationship to the card Flux. Emotionless, as I stare into the vortex of Flux.